In this conversation, I want to explore what I believe to be the most important thing to understand in terms of the patterns of energy, because everything that is a pattern of energy, that has the most constructive potential impact if we understand it, and the most destructive potential impact if we don't. So I want to begin with an understanding of the conscious mind, the subconscious, and the unconscious mind. So the conscious mind is, as a very tiny aperture, it's only aware of a very small amount of data at any given point. It is the smallest of all of the apertures, of all of the domains of awareness. Now, the subconscious mind is many times bigger than the conscious mind, perhaps 99% bigger than the conscious mind. And it is the biological memory of everything that has happened in this lifetime. You can go into hypnosis and you can see license plates that you saw at 6 years old. You can see the color of butter on your mother's hand at age 3, right? That information is stored in the body, but it is largely inaccessible to the conscious mind in that the focus of the conscious mind is what's important right now. It's a high magnification lens, and flooding, such a small aperture with tens of millions of meaningless details is not productive, right? So normally, most of the time, we don't remember, we don't reassemble the patterns of energy for much of our life. We tune it out in order to be more in the present. And then beyond that, perhaps 99.9% bigger than the subconscious mind, we have the unconscious mind. And in this area, we deal with the ecology, cultural, physical, natural ecology out of which we emerge, right? We have a delusionary perception of reality that this is me and that's everything else. By focusing the attention on this body and maintaining a very small aperture and magnifying and having a clear boundary, we pretend, we make believe that we are distinct, that we are separate from everything else in the world. It's just not real. It's a make-believe, right? Our thoughts are innately connected to the thoughts of our culture. You cannot even have a thought without language, and the language is inherited, right? You cannot have a thought outside of your paradigm. And to give you an example of that, if you try and ask the question to someone who hasn't understood the idea, the paradigm, what is your shadow? Right? Well, that's that thing behind me. Well, what about the psychological shadow? What is your psychological shadow, right? You don't know the answer to that unless you've been introduced to the paradigm of the shadow, usually by somebody else, right? The shadow is that which is denied, suppressed, repressed, ignored, minimized, right? It's the part that doesn't fit into the current narrative that is nonetheless a part of us. For example, in the scientific shadow exists the story of Descartes. Right? We hear about Cartesian logic, right? And materialism, like if you don't see it, if you can't feel it in a verifiable way in a test tube, then it's not real. We say, this is from Descartes. Well, sounds good. Descartes developed many of these ideas, but what's the shadow that doesn't fit in to Cartesian logic? Well, it's how Descartes, René Descartes, coming home, marching along, coming back from war, had a dream. And in René Descartes' dream, and dreams are not usually verifiable in a test tube, they're not repeatable, right? In his dream, there was an angel, which, again, not verifiable in a test tube. And the angel said to René, "Go forth and explore the world with measurements and numbers. Measure things. Give numbers to things. See what happens." And Descartes believed his dream. He believed an angel. Both non-materialistic phenomena, in order to develop the art of materialism. Right? So you can't fanatically believe reductionist materialistic science based on Cartesian logic and ignore the angel. But that hasn't stopped radical materialists, dogmatists of Cartesian logic from doing precisely that. They take the fruit of the angelic dream, but deny the root, the source of the fruit, which is the angel, right? And that's not too different from cultures throughout time, people, right? How many women enjoy the beauty of a flower, but ask that the root is dirty, right? Get that thing out of the house. That's dirty. I don't want to see that root. It's ugly. It's dirty, right? You deny the root, but appreciate the fruit, the flower, right? But without the root, there is no flower. People do that with human beings as well. Look down on people that work for a living, but admire the mansions that are made with their labor. It's stupidity, and it's normal. Ignore the angel, explore the logic, ignore the root, celebrate the flower, shame the laborers, and celebrate the architecture. It's irrational, right? It is not rational to deny the angel that gave birth to the path of rationality. But that hasn't stopped a lot of narrow-minded people from doing it, right? So, but the shadow, how could you think and answer the question? How could you be aware of what your shadow is if you haven't been exposed to the paradigm of the human shadow, right? And what about all of the things that you don't know, Because in your cult, in your culture, no one's talking about them. You haven't been exposed to those paradigms. Either they don't exist yet within your culture, or they exist in such a small minority of people that it's statistically unlikely you would encounter them, particularly in a cult that elevates normalcy, which is really the majority. You know, the illusion of the norm is what is the majority doing? So the elevation of normalcy is the elevation of the majority in tension with, in relationship with, the minority. So if you live in a cult that elevates the majority and demonizes the minority, you wouldn't want to be a misfit, an outcast, an outlaw, weird. You wouldn't want to be different. You wouldn't want anyone to know that you're different. You want to be part of the majority. Right? Well, then all of the cutting-edge ideas that have always been most alive in a distinct minority of people, the very definition of cutting edge, right? The edge of the knife is the minority of the knife. The majority of the knife is not the cutting edge, but it is what gives the cutting edge strength. Right? So the cutting edge of any technology, of any culture, culture being among the most important technology, is a distinct, highly competent minority. And in cults that shame their minorities and dissociate from them, you're less likely to be exposed to paradigms that only a small percentage of people have developed and shared, right? This is a minority exchange. Meaning you can walk into 10,000 American homes and no one in 10,000 is talking about this in this way. So we have a minority of less than 1 in 10,000. Right? So if you happen to stumble across it in a fold in the social media algorithms, you're a minority. And you're even more of a minority if you continue to prioritize it while noticing that you're in a minority. Right? Only 1 or 2 people are doing this. Well, right. So our culture celebrates the norm, the majority, while ignoring the fact that all evolution emerges out of an intelligent minority and is resisted by the majority to some degree. A lot of great ideas are slaughtered, right? People in the minority just give up, right? It's like, okay, you don't want a better way of doing things, fine. Just carry on the way you are. But evolution of a culture, of a people, occurs when the majority, often reluctantly, adopts the protocols of an intelligent minority that develops the new thing. Life does this with mutation. You plant 100 seeds of corn, and 1 or 2 of those seeds of corn are going to do better in that soil than the other 99 kernels of corn. It's going to be a slight mutation, a variation in the code, in the pattern. And that corn is going to grow better. Now, if corn, for whatever reason, is immune, right? Let's say it's genetically engineered so that it can't mutate. it'll eventually die out because all the surrounding plants in the ecology will continue that natural mutation. And the strongest of those plants will continue and continue to grow and continue to grow until corn doesn't stand a chance, right? Because it's a competition. There's a dynamic competition to consume energy, right? And there's lots of things. 99.99% of all life forms are radically different or are extinct today since the planet's inception. Since the planet emerged as a planet capable of producing what we call life, 99.9% of all those forms of life are now extinct because they changed into something else so different that we can't recognize them, or they didn't successfully compete with the new forms that did iterate and change. And so they're now dead. Now, what we see here, if we go back to this image of the unconscious, the subconscious, and the conscious, is that while we typically think of ourselves as different from the sky, from the air, from the plants, the trees around us, from other people, we are not. I do not exist as an individual without more than 10,000 generations of grandparents and grandparents and great-great-great-great-grandparents, right? On both sides. Meaning my mother's lineage goes back more than 10,000 generations, and my father's lineage goes back more than 10,000 generations. And if any of those generations had broken, not had kids, the chain would be broken, and I would not exist here today. So the idea that I'm distinct from any of those generations is absurd. Now, what happens, 100,000, 200,000, 100 million, 200 million years ago, right? Back when there were crocodiles 200 million years ago, and we have the inherited reptilian brain in our brainstem, what if crocodiles had gone extinct? Or whatever the name was for the animal that has evolved, that eventually crawled out of the ocean, that stood up? What if crocodiles had gone extinct back then? What if all life had gone extinct back then? Well, then again, I don't exist, and neither do you. Now, I've been breathing hundreds of times while we've been chatting. And what breathing is it's inhaling energy that's in the atmosphere, and it's exhaling energy that's produced in my body. Now, if that transfer did not occur successfully, my relationship with the atmosphere, I would be dead, and the atmosphere would have less carbon dioxide. Well, how am I separate from the atmosphere if I die without it, and if I affect it, and it affects me? I'm not. I am the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is me. Now, I just drank some sparkling water with lime. If I don't drink regular liquids, I die. So I'm not really separate from liquids in the ecology. I depend on them. It's an oxymoron to say, I depend on something that I'm separate from. If you look at anything and say, if it wasn't for that, I don't exist, that's a pretty intimate relationship. So I have an intimate relationship with water, with air, with food, with electricity, with tens of thousands of generations who have an intimate relationship with their animal ancestors, right? And I have a pretty intimate relationship with gravity. Without it, I don't exist. You understand that if gravity was dialed up 1,000%, my muscles would not be strong enough to lift me off of the floor, and I would crumple onto the ground and not be able to move. Pretty strong link to gravity. Similarly, if gravity was turned off and I floated off into the atmosphere, it would be very difficult to go to the fridge and get the liquid and food I need to survive. I'd just float off until I starved to death. And so I have a pretty intimate relationship with gravity, with liquid, with food, with space. I have a pretty intimate relationship with time. Every single thing I do today affects the future to some small degree until the end of time. The future is very slightly different based on me making this video than not making this video. For the next trillion years, just do the math. And similarly, if the Big Bang didn't happen, I wouldn't exist, which means I have a relationship to the first moment of recorded time. So I am an interconnected pattern of energy that has many links to every other pattern of energy. And that's what we call the unconscious mind. It's just the entire history of the planet is available through our body. Our body is the history of the planet. The very process of coming out of the womb, of emerging from the waters and learning to walk, is recorded in a nested life cycle that takes place over 9 months. But in reality might have taken place over 9 million years, or 90, or 900. Right? Reality is fractal, a series of nested patterns. So we have access through our bodies, through transcendent consciousness, to the history of all that is. And we are connected. The farthest star was once this far away from us the moment the Big Bang occurred. Not this us, the us out of which we emerged. So we have a very close relationship with all that is. And it might be called the unconscious mind, right? It's going out beyond lifetimes. And then we have a narrative, no proof, but a narrative, that life just started for no particular reason out of nothing 25 billion years ago. Poof, right? Poof. There's life. Nothing, nothing, and then poof, life. That's our narrative. Every cult in human history has had a narrative. The 10,000 cults or cultures with their 10,000 myths and stories and languages have all told of where we came from. Our story is we came out of nothing for no particular reason 25 billion years ago in a thing called the Big Bang. There might not have been any bang. Might just have been might have been a whoosh. We don't know. We just make it up. But regardless, right? What happened before the Big Bang? What's that, right? That could be a possibility field, a probability field that's even bigger. A higher consciousness, a deep consciousness, an all-encompassing consciousness. But certainly, as far as the eye can see, the inner eye or the outer eye, there's a series of circles or cycles that get bigger and bigger and bigger and get smaller and smaller and smaller. And we have never found the end of either. We haven't found the smallest particle. We used to think it was the atom, right? We used to think it was what we could see. 100 years ago, doctors dismissed germ theory because they were materialists and they couldn't see the germs. And so they consistently killed a large number of their patients by doing their cadaver research, right? They would take dead bodies and dissect them. And then when a mother would come in to deliver a baby, they would, sit the mother down over here, turn around, and use the same instruments and the same hands without washing them. And so they would infect the mother and the baby with diseases that were running rampant in the cadaver. And when Louis Pasteur and other people who cared about babies said, there must be something that is happening here. You're killing too many women, too many children. The doctors, they knew better than Louis Pasteur. They weren't going to wash their hands. They knew everything. And so they kept killing their patients until the microscope. See, the microscope fit within their paradigm because it made the invisible visible. Suddenly, you could see the germs crawling all over their dirty hands, and they had to admit that they had been killing their patients out of ignorance based on willful arrogance, or based on arrogance based on willful ignorance, right? They were rationalists. They weren't going to be taken in by some hocus pocus called germs. And so doctors started washing their hands. Well, this type of controversy has gone on since the beginning, right? There's never been a time in human history where a small minority of people have not proposed something that is scoffed at by the majority, who turn out to be wrong. Right? Not all the time. Some minorities are wrong. But at any moment in time, the highest truth, the best story, the best narrative that explains reality resides in a minority of minds. There's a small minority of people on the planet today, as has been the case throughout our history, that understand things better than the majority in any given area. And as has always been the case, the majority is doubtful, dubious, scoffing, arrogant, right? Using the power of mass. Right? The majority has the power of mass behind it. Power of mass says that when any two objects collide, the larger object knocks the smaller object out of the way. When a pinball hits a bowling ball, the pinball goes flying, the bowling ball continues on its original trajectory. And when someone has an unusual story, an unusual way of looking at things, that they present to their teachers in class, that they present to their parents, that they present to their government, and the majority doesn't like it, even though the majority is wrong. You see, Galileo offered to show the Catholics what was going on in the telescope. But he was one person at a time when the Catholic Church had a large body of faith-based believers, people that would believe whatever the priest said. And where the church was able to juggle, and it is quite a juggling act, on the one hand, the 10 Commandments that says, "Thou shalt not kill," and on the other hand, God's right to murder dissenting minorities who didn't fit into the tidy dogma espoused by the majority. So, torture, beheading, excommunication, public humiliation, you name it. The majority, at that time the Catholic Church, threatens the minority, Galileo, and demands that he tells lies rather than challenge the dogma of the status quo. At any given point throughout history, that story has repeated itself. Whether it's the Wright brothers being scoffed at for believing that people could fly, whether it's a woman who thinks that girls deserve an education, whether it's a woman who thinks that she has the right to vote 100 years ago, the majority of people in the United States were dubious about whether or not women should have the right to vote. Today, there are still people that pretend that certain skin colors, certain races, are innately superior to other skin colors, other races. Right? Stupidity residing in the majority is present today and has existed throughout time. And the same is true in the relationship between the conscious mind, which is the smallest mind, and the subconscious mind, and the unconscious mind, and the transcendent mind that is the divine mind, the mind that encompasses all that is. The conscious mind is the smallest mind. Right? But it often believes it knows more. It often trusts itself more than the other minds. Now, if you look closely, there is no boundary. All things are one. Right? If you look closely, one thing exists because all the other things exist. Take a possibility field. Well, if you delete one possibility in the possibility field, the entire possibility field collapses. In order to take one of these leaves here, right, and say, let's create a world where it is impossible for this leaf to exist. Well, in order to do that, we would have to create a world where no leaves could exist. Otherwise, it would be possible for this leaf to exist, because they're the same conditions. Now, if no leaves existed because we were in a world that no leaves could exist, then trees couldn't exist because trees produce leaves. In the world where no leaves and no trees could exist, it is incapable of producing trees or leaves, is a world that is incapable of producing all of the species that depend on trees and leaves, directly and indirectly. Let's say lions. They can't exist if there's no trees and there's no leaves. Because lions depend on catching gazelles, and gazelles depend on eating leaves, right? And the cycle just keeps unraveling. Right? If it is absolutely impossible for atoms to be organized in the pattern of a leaf, there are plenty of other things that become impossible as an organizational structure for atoms based on the same principle. Right? So this leaf isn't that important in and of itself, but the entirety of the planet's ecology may depend on its having the ability to exist, on it being possible. And out of the possibility, some things become more probable, and this leaf is actual, though it's virtual, right? So you could say that the conscious mind is the smallest mind. It is the most recent mind. Right? 100 million years ago, we didn't have the conscious mind. We do now. Maybe 100,000 years ago, we didn't have the conscious mind, right? We certainly weren't conscious of video cameras 100,000 years ago because the idea hadn't been invented. Could we understand the color blue 100,000 years ago? The natives, when Magellan emerged, didn't have the idea of big ships, so they didn't see the big ship. They talk about the Red Sea. Well, the sea was blue. Why did they only see a Red Sea? Well, maybe they didn't have the idea of blue. And that's just 500 years ago. So the conscious mind is very, very small. In a nested ecology that is tens and tens of thousands of times bigger than it, right? The conscious mind is a tiny speck within the fabric of all that is, within all that will be, within all that was. So if something is so tiny that you can, relatively speaking, barely see it, and it can only perceive a tiny amount of all that is, from one perspective at a time. So it's perceiving a very tiny amount of all there is to perceive in a very tiny location among all the locations at a very tiny point in time amongst the timescape. On a few narrow dimensions defined by sensory apparatus called noses and eyes, then perhaps the most important skill is the art of knowing where to direct the gaze of the conscious mind, where to move the conscious mind to focus or see certain things within the possibility field, within the probability field of all there is to see. And it's also clear that we can only change the form of some part of ourselves, of some part of our reality that we are conscious of, right? If you don't know what a lung is, and I say I'd like you to clean your lungs, stop blackening your lungs with cigarettes, for example, and you don't know what a lung is, you can't change it. You have to become conscious of something in order to influence it consciously, right? If you're not conscious of the meaning of a language and someone says, je ne pas, what does that mean? Que se bat? What does it mean? You have to become conscious of a pattern in some way, through words, through writing, through written words, spoken words, perceiving it visually, audio. You have to perceive it. It has to become conscious, and then you have to understand it enough to assess, can you influence it? And if you can influence it, then you have to do the thing that will influence it. And then you can change that area of yourself, of your body, of your reality, right? I have to know what a hand is to be able to move my hand. And then I have to know how to move it, right? A baby, an infant, learning how to do things. Cross your hands, open your hands, and then correlate those with words so that they can be consciously directed. So, this little lens, how to direct this little lens called the conscious mind into a tiny area of reality in a given point in space and time, defines our sphere of influence, of conscious influence. We may be changing reality in all kinds of ways we don't understand, but certainly the areas we understand, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to do this. We have to understand the meaning of the word house, the meaning of the word buy. We have to organize the paper, the money to make the transaction. We have to know what a signature is and be able to sign, and know what a pen is and be able to use it. But there's this tiny little area that we can move around into different areas of our reality. And the conscious mind can only be fully present in one location at a time. And half of our sensory data is buried. And we're not usually aware of the transcendent mind, the unconscious mind, most of the subconscious mind we're not aware of. We're aware of what we're aware of. So this is this tiny little bit, right? And because this bit is so tiny, most of our life has to be relegated to the subconscious. And it's relegated there through habits, right? We can set up a bit of code, like the conscious mind can only be thinking about one thing at a time, but it can think about something such as, what should be my routine? That's right now. You can write it down. This will be my routine. I will get up at 6 o'clock. I will do this. I will do this. I'll do this. And then you forget about, let go of the idea, what should be my routine. And then you just follow it. You develop a habit, a routine, a cycle that you unconsciously do. You don't every single moment say, who am I? What's my name? What's my language? No, you follow a routine. My current story is, my name is Dane. When anyone says, what's your name? I say that. It's a habit. It's a routine. Is it real? No. Why is my name Dane? Well, because someone called me that once before. Who cares? Well, I'm going to make that a habit because I don't want to invent names all the time, because I don't have the bandwidth. And why do you wear clothes? Well, that's my habit. Right? Our cult believes in covering certain portions of the body and doing it in certain styles, right? And calling it certain names. This is a shirt. It's a T-shirt because it's like the letter T, right? Well, why not, right? So all of these things get relegated to the subconscious, right? You can turn a lot of the subconscious, you can focus on if you want to, but do you want to be examining the meaning of T-shirts every single moment for the rest of your life? Or do you want to relegate that to a less critical area? And so most of what you create, most of what I create in this lifetime is the things that I set as habits, right? I can turn my attention over to this area like diet, and I can decide that I will buy food for these dishes and that this will be my diet. Every time I buy food, I'll buy these ingredients, and every time the ingredients get home, I'll mix this in this way. And this dish will be created, and I will eat it. I won't reinvent the diet every single time I eat, considering every one of the more than 10,000 recipes on the planet. No, I will just repeat a habit. And you've probably seen the musicians that play on street corners from time to time. You can look on YouTube, one-person bands. Do a search for one-person bands. And you look at how they build up an interesting song. They start with the simplest of the beat, and they put that on repeat. Then they do another intermittent beat, and they put that on repeat. Then they do a little tune and put that on repeat. Then they say a chorus and put that on repeat. And then they get the guitar and fiddle around on top of all that. And the guitar is doing the spontaneity in the moment. And then they add some song, right? Some spontaneous vocals. And it sounds very interesting because there's a piano and there's a drum beat and there's another drum beat and there's a little bit of this and then there's a chorus and the guitar is going and it sounds great. But what they're doing is they've only got one conscious mind, and so they focus on the beat and get that and then say, just repeat that. They focus on this and say, just repeat that. They focus on this and say, just repeat that. And then what they improvise is a very small subsection of that, which is their voice, etc., on the end. And so that's how one small focus can become a rich song. That's how one focus at a time can become a rich life. I decide that I will buy this house, and I buy it, and then that's the house. I don't move house every day. That's the base, right? This is the house I'm moving into. And then I do my morning run. That's the second beat, right? The rhythm. I wake up, the alarm at this time, I go on my morning run. I go do this, I do this, I do this, and I come back. That's the second beat. Then I visualize positive things, and that's the third beat. And then I do this. And then that's been now my routine. Dun, 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 dun. And then what I do is in that routine, I focus on the most important thing at a given moment. And I try and iterate that. I try and change that. I say, oh, that bit isn't working. I've got to, change that. And I change it, and then I come back to the next thing. But I can only, in the entire fabric of my life, I can only focus on one or two things at a given point. I can change those. Then they have to be put on repeat. They have to go into the subconscious mind because they're too big. I can only focus consciously on one thing at a time. And so this technology of moving something into consciousness and knowing what to move into consciousness, how to iterate it into something that produces a better outcome, and then send it back to the subconscious, is a repeat cycle, right? It's a breath. Into the conscious mind, iterate it. Out to the subconscious mind, repeat. Into the conscious mind, iterate it. Out to the subconscious and repeat. And most of our life is made up of old patterns. Why are they old? Because life is really complex and the conscious mind is very small. And so a core belief, for example, was put in place and iterated at age 3, at age 7. And it's just running in the background. No one's ever looked at that belief again and iterated it. And then this habit of sucking on my thumb when I was anxious, well, that was put into place at age 8 or age 5. It worked, right? No one's gone back to revisit it other than humiliation. So don't do it in public, right? So all of these habits, many of which have rarely been questioned for decades, are just as if that musician building up that song, that beat, etc., never turned any of them off and was able to start another song because it wasn't very conscious when it was formed in the first place. Your father just said, that's the way the world is, and you just accepted it and then never went back to it. Now, the reason that identity, the pattern that the I identifies with, is the most important thing in creating our conscious experience and the world around us, is that the identity, or the identity that the I attaches to, is 95% or more of our reality. Meaning 95% or more of our reality is an unconscious repetition or a subconscious repetition that we set in place at one time and don't have the bandwidth to fully analyze in each moment and change. So if we look at our subconscious mind, we have this belief that was formed at age 7 that's just running. We have that feeling that was running. We have this self-image that was running. We have that habit that was running. We have pleasure related to this food, and so we decided this food was always good, so we just always eat that food. And we like this music, so that's on our playlist, and we just repeat it. And we decided we like this kind of music, so we only listen to that kind of music and repeat that. And then we live in this area and we talk in this language, and the whole thing is a series of habits. And the conscious mind is right here, looking at who am I and where do I want to go. But what's creating our reality is the synergy of all of these subconscious routines, rhythms, patterns that have been put in place. You say hello to someone, you shake your hand like that. Those are patterns. At one point you formed the pattern, and now you just do the pattern. And that leaves your conscious mind free to focus on something different, something new within that pattern, within the context, within the ecology of all those patterns. So identity is our habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. 95% of our expression is habit, is identity. It's a habit that we've attached to, we associate ourselves with, and we just keep it going. And then less than 5% of our day, of our time, is iterating, is focusing on developing some small area within all of our lives, and hopefully improving it. And this is why the science of identity, which is the science of forming habits, of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, evaluating habits, upgrading habits, and deciding which habits are more important to our well-being to upgrade than others. This is the most important skill that a conscious mind can have, because that's its only job. The job of a conscious mind is to scan reality and say, oh, there's a problem there, and say, is that the most important problem? Well, relative to what? Sustainable well-being. And every human being in the history of humanity wants to feel sustainably better and wants to avoid feeling chronically worse. So an important area of our life is something that if we change it, we will feel substantially better for a long period of time. And an unimportant area of our life is an area that if we change it, we'll feel little or nothing at all. We might even feel, and on the intelligence and stupidity continuum, right? Because we don't often know, a stupid person, that's all of us at times, a stupid person picks the wrong thing, and this is just objectively, right? Like if you're a business owner and you're losing $1 million a day by having this store open. You opened a store, your costs are $1 million a day, or your costs are $3 million a day, and your revenue from that store is $2 million a day. So your net loss is $1 million a day every day that store is open. Now, you're also spending 10 cents more per pencil in your office. 10 cents more, meaning if the purchase agent in the office would just scroll down another couple of lines, they can find the same pencil delivered free for 10 cents less. And you own the company. Right? If you're stupid, you will solve the pencil problem. After all, 10 cents is 10 cents. A penny saved is a penny earned. Right? You can't have waste. Let's get those cheaper pencils. And then let's have a meeting. Hey, everyone, scroll down, pay a little bit more time, treat this like it's your own money. Good meeting. All right. You just lost another $1 million. Right? A smart person can identify. Now, in financial terms, it makes it easier. You just say, look for the biggest number. What's the most you would lose if you don't solve the pencil problem? $100 a year. What's the most you would lose if you don't solve the store problem? Well, $360 million a year. Well, it's thousands of times more important to solve the store problem than it is to solve the pencil problem. But many of us do not solve the store problem because it's outside of our competency. And we don't like feeling that we don't know what we're doing, which we don't a lot of the time. Meaning you and I don't know what we're doing a lot of the time in areas that dramatically affect our lives. Now, in order to know what we're doing in the areas we don't know what we're doing, the first step would be to say, I don't know what I'm doing here. Now, in a cult that humiliates people for not knowing, that's the American cult, many people would gladly lose $300 million a year, if they can afford it, than admit that they don't know what they're doing, right? Stupid cultures breed stupid cult behaviors in what becomes stupid people. Meaning, on average, the majority of people will not be more intelligent than their cult or culture. Otherwise, since the culture is made up of the majority of people, the cult would be more intelligent, right? So the individual is a fractal representation of the cult. The cult is a fractal representation of the majority of its people, or certainly those with the most dominance. So there's all kinds of things that have massive amounts of impact on well-being that we lack the competence to understand and do something about. And because we don't want to admit that we don't know, and that we don't know that we don't know, we solve the pencil problem that we know. And we don't solve the other problem that we don't know. Well, if you imagine how big this is, in America there's 400 million people. Well, if 400 million people are all solving the wrong problem that they know because they don't want to admit that they don't know how to solve the more important problem that they don't know, that's a problem. Particularly when some problems are so big. When some problems, if you don't solve them, are leading to massive hits in sustainable well-being. So that's why identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, the science of identity, how to construct an identity, how to iterate an identity, how to know which part of the identity to iterate, is the single most important competency that an individual or its fractal representation at a cult or cultural level can learn. A cult or culture that can critically analyze its own memes, its own patterns, and can teach the protocols for iterating and evolving itself rather than defaulting to the arrogance of almost all cultures in human history, meaning of the 10,000 cults and cultures we have found as anthropologists, almost all of them thought that they were right. Meaning, you can tour the globe today, of which there are roughly 500 cultures remaining and roughly 500 languages. And if you can find someone with a distinct set of gods and goddesses and myths and beliefs, if you can find someone and you ask them, what do you believe? How was the world created? What's God? What's this? And they can say it. And then you ask them, is that true? Meaning, is what you believe the correct way of looking at things? There's never been a cult in human history that said no. Right? The Catholics were doing the right thing by burning people at the stake and telling them that the reason they're being burned is because they're not believing in the Ten Commandments. They were right. If you can travel 500 years in the past and ask some dumb bishop, are you right to suppress science? Absolutely he's right. Don't look through the telescope, look at the good book. He's right. And you know what? You're right too. If you ask any individual and say, what do you believe? What do you think? And is that the right thing to believe? You're going to say yes. Despite the fact that you are obviously wrong. Meaning, if you hung around for another 1,000 years, it's absolutely guaranteed that you will see things differently than you do today. Just as today, it's absolutely guaranteed that you see things differently than when you were 2 years old. And if you ask yourself today, does today's idea, is it better than your 2-year-old's idea, your version of reality? You would say, no, mine's better. 1,000 years from now, you would say that my idea is better than the one you had 1,000 years ago. And it's radically different. 150 years ago, statistically, you're on the fence about whether or not women should vote. Today, hopefully, you know that women should have the right to vote. Right? That's 150 years of a pretty basic understanding of gender. Right? What about 1,000 years? So why do you think you're right? Why do you think your cult is right? When 95% of all cults in human history are now extinct, and you would say unequivocally, as all of those cults would say to you, that they're right and you're wrong. That you're right and they're wrong. Why do you think that you're part of that 1%? Everyone does. Everyone thinks they're part of that 1%. So a good way to look at this is that at any given moment, 95% or more of what's going on, of your habits of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, are subconscious. They're default mode. They're in the background. And only about 1% of your whole reality is conscious. And your job as an ego, the I that identifies with being conscious of all of that data, is to decide which 1% of your reality at any given moment to shine the flashlight of awareness on. So your job is to decide what to focus on and what to do with what you focus on, so that you achieve the innate shared goal of every member of humanity throughout time, to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. Now, your identity, your habits, are the most important thing because they're shaping most of your reality. Meaning, if you think a conscious thought like, I'd like to be happy right now, that thought is not shaping most of your reality. Your habitual thoughts are shaping much more than that one, right? That may be an anomaly. If you're looking up and enjoying the moment as your impulse in the moment, that's having less impact than your habit of looking at your phone 95% of the time and worrying about this or that, right? The habits are creating 95% of our reality because 95% of us is a habit. A habit of thinking, a habit of feeling, a habit of doing. And they tend to reinforce one another, right? If we think, oh, I'm going to fail, and then we feel like a failure, generally we behave like a failure, then we feel and think some more that we're a failure, and then we form an identity, an image of ourselves as a failure. And then in order to be consistent, have some sanity, right? Because we don't like to be crazy. So if I have an image of myself as a failure, then I've got to fail, otherwise I'm crazy, right? I can't have an image of myself as a failure and be winning. That would be nuts, right? So having formed the image of myself as a failure, I've got to do a certain amount of failing to prove that I'm not crazy, to have some integrity. So that's going on then in the background. And then in a moment, we do this and we do that, but we go back to the pattern. We go back to the default mode. And our consciousness is only focused in one given area at any given point. The rest is running on default. So our patterns are the most important thing because they shape most of reality. On the other hand, our eye, our little conscious lens at any given moment, is the most important thing because through that lens, we change our patterns. So the job of a good or a useful ego, let's break it down. What does a useful, competent ego do, given that we all have an innate drive to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse? Well, here's what a good ego does. First of all, you locate pain. Why pain rather than well-being? Well, the brain is predisposed to amplify negativity or pain by a 500% margin relative to well-being and pleasure. Another way of saying that, if someone gives you an insult, your brain is going to spend 5 times more of its energy processing the insult than if someone gives you a compliment. Why? Well, because it's being categorized in the brain as either a threat or a source of nourishment or well-being. And the reason the brain prioritizes threats, and it hasn't really caught up with the fact that an insult isn't necessarily the same as a tiger or a gun sight. Right? The brain hasn't done a very good job of differentiating those two risks. So there's social assassination, which correlates ultimately, right? If you lose rank socially, you have fewer mating options, you have fewer monetary options, you have less cooperation, less empathy to rely on if you go down in rank. So there is a connection. But the brain is not very good at nuancing those connections. It's not saying, well, there may be a few people laughing at me for the next day or so because of this humiliation, but none of them are my boss. None of them are in a position to fire me. My money is coming from an independent source. I'll bounce back. I've got other friends, and this is not a big deal, right? Social assassination is a big deal in the brain, right? Because it's not able to parse those things out very well. It has a reaction as if you're going to die. Now, the reason the brain prioritizes potential threats of death, however obscure, 5 times more than well-being, is that if it gets that wrong, there's no opportunity to experience well-being later, right? If you wobble a bit at 70 miles an hour on the road and you don't notice, you don't get another chance. At 70 miles an hour, if you hit into another car in oncoming traffic, or drive into a concrete bridge, of a dividing line or something, you don't get another chance in many cases. But if you don't notice the complement, if you don't focus on the complement, life goes on. You're still alive. And there's more time in the future for another complement. So that's the brain's logic, is my number one job is to keep you alive. And since there are literally millions of things that could kill at any given moment, every time we drive out on the road, literally 1 minute of incompetence is enough to kill a person. Well, there's lots of minutes, there's lots of opportunities, there's lots of ways incompetence can show up. So it's prioritizing risk. It's just not doing a very good job of analyzing that risk. And so your first job as an ego is to look at the biggest source of pain in your life, because your brain is making 5 times more of a deal about that pain. It's amplifying that pain 5 times more than it's amplifying your greatest joy. So with the goal, the innate goal that we all share of feeling sustainably better and avoiding feeling chronically worse, if you reduce 1 unit of pain, you get the benefit of a 5-fold reduction, meaning you get the benefit of 5 units of pain going down, not just 1. So it's a little bit like matching funds. If you're going to donate money to a nonprofit for some worthy cause, and there are 2 worthy causes, and you want to have the most impact. And in one worthy cause, one nonprofit, if you donate $1, a billionaire is going to match you with $4. So every dollar you spend for the next month on this nonprofit, $5 will be spent on that charity, right? They're 2 charities, they're both good, but in one of them, you get $5 of impact for every dollar you spend. In the other one, you just get $1. Well, that's kind of the situation we're in with our amygdala, our fear brain, and our future envisioning brain. If we have a great idea about the future that's worth 1 unit of well-being, we get 1 unit of well-being. But if we have a fear, a paranoia, a pain that in any way seems to our brain like it could lead to death, social death, physical death, financial death, mental death, insanity, any of those deaths or traumas. Now, we've got 5 units of pain for every one. So if you reduce a unit of pain, you get 500% more benefit than if you increase a unit of pleasure, which is why an intelligent ego, their first job is to look at all the patterns in our life and say, which of my chronic thoughts, feelings, behaviors, ways of being, ways of spending money are leading to the most pain? Working at this job, talking to my mother, dealing with this current lover, being in traffic, whatever it is that's causing the most pain, that's the thing to focus on, with the intention of changing the pattern, right? So this is what the analysis of a competent ego looks like. So the competent ego, first of all, like all egos, it's a very tiny dot. So it doesn't have much bandwidth. But its first job is to go into the life, right, and scan through and say, this one. This is the source of the biggest amount of pain. That's the first thing to identify. Now, the next thing to identify is it low-hanging fruit? Meaning, is it something that I can change? For example, if I work in a mining town where there are no other jobs and my boss is a dickhead and those are the only jobs in town, and I don't want to move, and I'm not independently wealthy and I don't know how to become independently wealthy, then that isn't low-hanging fruit. Right? My boss is a dickhead. It's the biggest source of pain. And I can't get rid of the boss. Okay. So what are my options? Can I adjust my reactivity? No, I can't, because I lose control of my feelings. I feel reactive. I want to kill him every time. And trying to be positive just makes me feel frustrated, and so I can't change the reaction. What about timing? Could I change my timing? Like, is the boss ever in a good mood? Is it better to interact with him in the morning or in the afternoon? Can I change that? No, I can't change it because he comes in or she comes in whenever they want to, and so I don't have control over that. Okay. What about... Are there any people the boss treats better? Oh, they like that cute employee over there. Well, I can't change my appearance. Okay, that's, You go through piece by piece, and then you say, well, what about the amount that I beat myself up after? You think, well, let's give it a try. What would be the approach? Well, could I read a book where I wouldn't humiliate myself for being humiliated repeatedly? What if I turned my story between I'm a loser who can't stick up for themselves because they're a coward, because they're a failure, because I have no other options, and that's because I'm dumb, and I can't start a company like my brother, and this and that and the other. What if I changed that story to I am a winner that is enduring, meaning let me read a book to kind of classify the narcissistic abusive tendencies of my boss. Okay, so my boss is about a 7 on the horrible boss scale. There's always a worse boss, but they're a 7 in horribleness. This, and this. Well, what about if I let off steam and did this? And what if I wrote a review on Glassdoor anonymously? And what if I did these things to digest that feeling? And what if I told myself this story? That I am making a terrific effort in an imperfect situation. Most people's situation is imperfect, and there isn't a better job, but I'm not just going to resign myself to endless torment. I have a plan. I have to save up, $150,000 and invest it in this before I can change the situation. So my game is, how can I be as unpresent to the abuse of my boss as possible, and I'll rate that 1 to 10. And then how quickly can I go on beyond it and focus on my goal? And then how can I vent or even seek revenge, like undermine, or how could I save up enough money to move or start my own business, etc. So that's the area that I can change. So this is my biggest pain. But then the ego says, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to start my business. And so then the next question is, well, how could I learn that? Right? If I go on YouTube entrepreneurship or on Audible and start looking at reviews, who are the people that help people to start businesses? Now, the next thing that we can look at is, am I utilizing my anger, my resentment, my hostility and hatred at this horrible boss? Am I utilizing that charge because it's a neutral state, right? It's a reactive energy. It's intense, it's focused. Am I utilizing it to go forward towards the life that will deliver more sustainable well-being? Or am I bottling that up and using that to kill myself? Right? Bottled up energy, it's like a short. If you pass electricity through your body, you can help create a light bulb. But if you hold both ends and don't let it go through and just hold on, it shorts out. You start smoking, you destroy your body. So this is an arena of competence. You might look at something like Michael Csikszentmihalyi and his book, Flow, to look at how to harness constructive, destructive, constrictive, expansive energy to move forward. So the first area of competence, can I identify the worst pain? Next is, can I identify the arena in which I might have a chance at reducing that? And then third, can I study the best people, meaning based on reviews and feedback, who has helped the most people to improve in this situation? Can I find them on Audible, on YouTube, in a book, in a library? And can I use my constrictive energy, what I don't like, to motivate me forward, to create motion faster than I would otherwise get to where I want to go? Now, so we're looking at 4 competencies. First, prioritize the pain over the well-being. That's the first competency. Secondly, locate the most intense pain. That's the next competency. Third, evaluate the area that I can have influence and find it. And then fourth, use the constrictive energy to propel me faster towards where I want to be than I would go without the constriction. See, this is how your enemy becomes your ally. Right? I had a real dickhead of a neighbor and a real dickhead of a landlord. And as a result of the frustration around that, I moved into the nicest house that I've ever lived in. That's where I want to be, right? So then the dickhead becomes the main reason that my house is so beautiful, right? Because I wasn't, who wants to move? All this stuff and all that. But nonetheless, I'm living in this house because of 2 dickheads. Well, that's a talent, like that's an intelligence. And you track that and then go on to the next pain. And you have to do it one at a time because the ego is very small. What we can focus on is very small. For example, just moving house. Oh, that's a big deal. So now that frustration eliminated. There's always another one, right? But in general, you want to focus first on mitigating, eliminating, reducing, and harnessing the worst pains. Right? Sometimes you have to endure a certain amount of pain, discomfort, awkwardness, but you can harness it. What I mean by that is you can crystallize and motivate where you want to be. Every moment of, oh, I can't wait till this is done, right? I can't wait till I have my own money. For an adolescent leaving home, right? I can't wait till I can get rid of these stupid parents. Oh, they're just so, so they're motivating and they're crystallizing. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I need to do, right? So to create more flow towards sustainable well-being. Now, once you've cleared out the negative, and by the way, that's easier in two ways. One, you've got to deal with it. Two, most people know what they don't like more than what they like. So this is also your chance to practice and develop competency in this area. But once you have developed clarity of what you don't like, try and invert that. I hated that. So maybe I would love the opposite. Right? I hate a nosy landlord that does this. So maybe what I want is a landlord that does the opposite, that does this and this and this. Or to own my own house. Right? Well, how would I have to do that? Well, I'd do this, take this and this and this. Do I care? Do I hate it enough to be motivated? I just can't stand it. That's pointless. To just say, I can't stand it, but I'm such a loser, that's shorting out. I can't stand it, so today I did this. I went to a mortgage place. I couldn't stand that mortgage person, so I went to another mortgage place. I got pre-approved for this. It's not quite where I want to be, but now I know what I have to earn, how much more I have to earn in order to be where I want to be. So here's where I would get now. And then these are the steps that I'm going to do to do this and this and this and this. And then I'll be where I want to be. So then you move to the constructive areas. You move to the areas where it's a different question. It's what area could provide the most amount of well-being, or is providing the most amount of well-being? What friendship? What area is just doing all of my happiness is from this, seeing this one person. Okay, so then how can I bring more of this person or more people like this person into my life? How can I have more, elongate those interactions? How can I be the kind of person that this person wants to interact with? Do I like who I have to become in order to interact more with this person? So, and what your goal is, right? So you analyze, this is the pattern. You create a hypothesis, you test it, you make a change, you change one of the variables, and you see up or down. Are you going in the right direction or not? You keep learning, you keep gathering feedback, you keep finding what works, and then you go on to the next item, right? Generally speaking, if you focus on one thing that is the worst pain or the greatest possible benefit, and just focus on that until you've made a substantial improvement, generally speaking, that's a good approach, right? And if you're getting nowhere with one approach, try another area, okay? I'm getting nowhere. And I'm just getting more frustrated with my boss because I'm trying all these things and they're still not working, so I feel like an even bigger loser. Okay, give up on the boss for a little bit. What about the other area of pain? Traffic, right? Traffic. Oh, I hate traffic. Okay, well, what about changing the routine? What about stopping at the beach for an hour and then driving home at 8 p.m., having dinner, bring a picnic, stop at the beach on the way, and then go home at 8 p.m.? Okay, that's gotten rid of half of the traffic, plus brought in the beach. Or what if I brought in education and really studied people, comedy, whatever, that I love for that 2 or 3 hours a day in traffic, where I come home more educated and interested? And what if I put put my phone in there and record thoughts as I'm learning stuff and review that, so that my most unproductive time becomes my most productive time? Or what if I hired a driver and did typing and emails and had good conversation with my driver? Or what if I moved closer to the job? So you look at it. That's what a good ego does. And then it relegates that as the new pattern. That's it. That's a competent ego. And it's not comparing to other people. That's destructive, because you're not other people and you don't have the same starting point. You compare it to yourself, right? A good investor is relatively happy, is thrilled with a reliable 15% of compounded return. Well, use that standard. Your job, starting today as a competent ego, is to reduce 10 to 15% of your pain reliably. And aim for more if you can. You're a winner, right? But if you can reduce 15% of your pain in 1 year, hey, those are good returns, because that's worth 5 times more. That's 70% reduction with the way the brain treats that. That's wonderful. And once you've gotten rid of that, focus on increasing well-being. If you can add 15% more well-being, things that you care about, things that you love, things that you find good, beautiful, and true, 15% more. Whatever the good life is for you. If it's sex, 15% higher quality or frequency. If it's money, 15% higher, right? Learn. Be worthy, meaning become better, more competent at your work, and more competent at negotiating and listing. These are the reasons I think I should get a 15% raise. And they shouldn't be because I said so. They should be because I'm making you 15% more money than I did last year. It's not I'm here. I'm still around. I should get tenure. No. I've figured out how to make you 20% more money this year than last year. You get 5%, give me 15%. Do you agree? And you can set that up as a target, right? 15% compounding. 15% compounding is a good life. Wherever you start, you could start in hell. Next year, 15% less hell. Next year, 15% less hell. People praise Warren Buffett as the greatest investor of our time. For what? 20% compounded returns. But that's illusion. And what I mean by that is people are operating under the illusion that more and more money will make you happier. Meaning the person that has $1 million and then goes to 1,200,000 is not 20% happier. That's an illusion. Which is why, the person that's going from 20,000 to 30,000 a year, they are getting good returns on that, up to around 100 to 170,000 a year. Then it tapers off, right? Now, Warren Buffett is mostly helping rich people get richer, right? Because most poor people don't have any money in the stock market. And helping rich people get richer does not correlate nicely with happiness. It just doesn't. If you've got 20 million and now you've got 22 million, your life doesn't change. You got nothing and then you got 5,000. Wow, that's a change. You got 30,000 and now you got 40. That's a change. But 10 million and now you've got 12. Now you've got 11. It's not a big deal. What are you going to do? Right? Add another 5,000 square feet of stuff that you don't use? Right? How many, you can already go out to dinner as much as you want with 170,000. Nice places. Right? So then it gets boring. Right? But you have real currency. And what I mean by that is the whole purpose of money in the fable of our culture is that it will make you happy. It does up to a point, and then it doesn't. So it's a simple fable. But well-being is well-being. And if you can improve and iterate and make your pain lower, your happiness higher by 15% or more a year, wow, in 10 years? In 20 years? In 30 years? You're the greatest investor of all time in what really matters, right? That never wears out. And then and then at some point, your greatest happiness is bringing happiness and well-being to other people. Why? Because like money, there's a certain point where you're eating the best food, you've got enough money, you're spending time with wonderful people, and the only thing you want is to see other people around you enjoying the same, having the same freedoms, the same peace, the same happiness as you do. And this is where the magic begins again, right? You may already have it all, but helping someone else near you who doesn't have it all and doesn't know how and have 20% more, that's exciting, right? That's exciting. So that's what a competent ego does. Locates the pain, responds to it effectively, locates the well-being, amplifies and grows it, fills and meets their own needs, and then starts serving other people, which is really serving the self that would like to be surrounded by loving, happy, competent people who like themselves. So how competent is your ego? What does it do relative to that competence? What's the low-hanging fruit? What's working? What's not working? Right? Because one thing is guaranteed. We all have a default mode network, and if we don't intervene, it's whatever our parents' and cults' default mode network is. Whatever they did. And it never was all that great. So that's what we do. And intergenerational incompetence gets passed down. But if we iterate that, we take the code we've been given and update it and simplify it and delete crazy parts of it. In order to be happy, I must suffer. It's a bit of a difficult thing to do. I don't want to suffer. I want to be happy, but to happy, I have to suffer. What about rewriting that to in order to be happy, I have to learn the skills of being happy. That just seems a little cleaner, a little more straightforward. And in order to learn how to be happy, I'll find happy people who know how to do it more than I do. Make sense? Give it a try. See how it works, right? And can you do it 15, 20% more next year? How much time, right? How much time can you allocate to do this iterative, this upgrading of the pattern? Because although we can only work and focus on less than 5% of our lives at any given point, all the other things that we focused on before and will focus on again in the future are still creating our lives, step by step in the meantime.